In this video, we're going to be discussing the Vipra, Varna. The Varnas, as we had discussed, are the 4 stages, or you could say mindsets or worldviews that are present in the human social cycle. At any given time, the particular worldview, one of the particular worldviews that represent the Varnas, will be the dominant worldview. In the last video, we discussed the Kshatriya or warrior worldview, the warrior Varna. And we saw how it moved from the Shudra or commoner, masses worldview, and we saw how the Kshatriya worldview took over through the advantage that the warrior mindset had in a Shudra commoner world. Today we're going to talk about the move from the warrior to the thinker, the Kshatriya to the Vipra, also known as Brahmin in the traditional Hindu Varna class system. 2 things I want to say before we begin. First thing is, this series is meant to be watched from the beginning to the end in episode numerical order. So while you'll get some valuable information out of this video watching it by itself, you'll get the most information about the concept and overall big picture thesis that I'm trying to present by watching these videos from 1 all the way through. The second thing I want to say is, again, to reiterate, as we discuss these worldviews, these mindsets, that they exist at all times. There are individuals that have these worldviews, the masses, the warrior, the thinker, and the merchant. And again, remember, they move in a cycle like that, and then back to the masses. There are individuals who have these within any society at any time. They're all there. At any given time, a particular mindset is the dominant mindset. That is, the people in control of the society who are at the levers of power in society have that particular mindset, and that mindset is celebrated, and because of that, it moves through the society. But at all times, they're there. So in a warrior society, the merchants are still there. When we're talking about the masses, when it's the commoner society that's sort of in control, and as we talked about before, could be, you could say, the indigenous people, the thinker is in there too. As an example, since we're talking about the thinkers, in indigenous societies, the Shudra, the commoner worldview, is the most present. But there are thinkers within that group, and usually these would be shaman, for instance, medicine men, who have knowledge about the history of the people, the stories of the people, and plant medicine and lore. They have some understanding of how to use the natural world around them to benefit the people. And they study those things. And it's in that lineage and in that society that that knowledge grows. There's also the Kshatriyas, would be represented as a hunter society. You also have the merchants, of course, the idea of trade. There are even some non-human animals, like they've studied that there are certain apes that understand the concepts of trade. So that's the thing to remember, that these are all present, and just because I may not be talking about what role one is playing, you can, I think, as I discuss the worldview and when it's dominant, you can pretty much extrapolate out if I haven't spoken specifically about it. So let's begin. Let's talk about the thinker. And the place to start, as we briefly touched on, we're going to start in the Kshatriyan world. We're going to start in the world where the worldview of the warrior is the dominant one. This is the time, the age, if you will. The Kshatriyan age is going to be an age of kings and chiefs. It's going to be an age when at the top of the hierarchy is the king, are the warriors, the warrior class. And that's what's celebrated. And the values of the Kshatriyan age and the values of the Kshatriyan class are about valor and bravery and glory. That's how one rises to power. That's what's respected. That's what gets you the most social value. And as we discussed, the thinkers fill a niche, like an ecological niche. How different organisms in a particular ecosystem find their own area that they can live inside and get resources out of, and their byproducts then become the food of another organism, and so on, in kind of the circle of life, right? Well, this is the circle of human life and our psychology. So I'm going to go back to the metaphor, the sort of fable that I used in the previous video, the rock in the road. So to briefly summarize again, there's a village, Shudra come in our village, there's a rock in the road. Nobody knows when it fell, nobody knows how it got there, but as long as anybody can remember, it's always been there. The problem with the rock in the road is there's a steep drop-off on either side of the rock, which means anybody going on that path has to go around. And on occasion, somebody slips and falls and dies. The Kshatriya, metaphorically, is walking with his child, say. His child loses its footing, slips and falls, and dies. In his anger and his fury, with his strength and his bare hands, he goes to punish this rock, to push this rock out of the way. And he's pushing with all his might, and he's straining for hours and hours, and he's exhausted, but it's just his sheer will and his fury and his rage. But he can't move the rock. And after hours of pushing, down the road comes the thinker. And as he approaches, he says, well, what are you doing? He says, this damn rock. My child died. I'll never see another child die. I'm going to push this rock. And the thinker says, listen. You're a strong guy. It's fantastic. But you're never going to be able to move that rock. See, you just don't have the strength in your arms to be able to do it. But let me show you a little trick. And he goes into the woods and he chops a tree, whittles it down into a strong pole, and brings it over to the Kshatriya and says, listen, this is a lever. With this tool, it's going to magnify your strength, and you'll be able to push this rock. The Kshatriya, the warrior, he's shocked, but the thinker says, watch. Digs a hole, sticks it under the rock. He says, now, you, don't push on the rock, push down on the lever. Kshatriya does, the rock starts to move, and whew, it's off. And this represents the niche that the thinker fills for the warrior. The warrior system, when we have a Kshatriyan society, as we said before, they go after each other to seek to gain resources and glory. And when you have two warriors battling with their bare hands, or battling with the same set of weapons, it truly is the one who has trained the hardest through force of will, the one who is the bravest, who won't run away, who's the most focused. It's completely internal within him. However, when you change the dynamic by adding either a technological advance in the offensive weapon or in the defensive weapon, some armor, put him on a horse, right? Some distance between him and the other individual, then you change the scope of the battle. It's no longer about the bravest or the most highly trained. It's about the one with the most technological innovations. This goes for offensive weaponry. It goes for defense, defending a city with walls. So now we're talking about the thinker brings architecture into the mix. Right? How do you build a strong wall? How do you build a high wall? The higher the wall, the better. Right? If we can rain stones, women and children can hurl stones down on trained soldiers, right? Who can't get up the wall. And if you've got a wall surrounding your city, you're good to go. If you've got enough food inside, you can hold out forever. So that's the advantage that the thinker brings to the party. As I had mentioned before, I'm talking about the grand human social cycle. But inside of every human organization, if this cycle is true, you're going to see this same cycle take place. I think a great example of a Kshatriyan culture, a pure Kshatriyan culture that we can look at, a pure warrior culture that we can look at in our own society, is the realm of sports. And there's perhaps no more Kshatriyan sport in our society than football. American football, which really is a simulated war. A simulated war. And if you look at the roots of football, which would be something like rugby, initial game, and you look, it really is a man-on-man, strength on strength, even down to the scrum, where they throw the ball down and all of them just kind of go, boo! Together, right? And it's just like who can muscle it out and get it. It's all muscle, right? It's almost a pure Kshatriyan game. And the American take on it changed a few things, right? It added in set plays. You know, you stop and then you start. As it further evolved, the tactical nature became how you win. And in American football, who must be a star player in order for your team to attain greatness? Right? The quarterback. And what is it that traditionally, and even still, I mean, if you look at Peyton Manning, probably will go down as the greatest quarterback in history, at least so far. What sets him apart from every other quarterback who's ever lived is his intelligence. Of course, he's got a great arm. There's a lot of quarterbacks that have great arms. But it's his ability to read a defense, change the plays, audible, move people around in mere seconds, and then to see what's happening, to have this big picture view and have quick reaction times, see what's happening, and deliver the ball to the right guy. Right on time. And the quarterback's often called a field general, right? Think about football and how many war references there are, right? Throwing a long bomb, the field general, a defensive line, penetrating the line, going deep into enemy territory. So you have the thinkers come up, the quarterback. And this is initially, and he's a player. And that's how it works. Usually the early Vipras are the smart Kshatriyas. Remember, this is a spectrum. So he's still mainly Kshatriya with a little Vipra in him. Right? He's an innovator within that. Then, what you move to is a pure Vipra, right? So you've got the quarterback, but you get a distinct advantage now if you have a great coach. You have a great coach. And then you get a whole coaching system of a head coach and individual position coaches, offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators, and now you have a thinker system integral to the team, integral to the game being played. And not only now is it a battle between the guys on the field, but it's a battle between the coaches off the field. And you see this drama played out. You see this described by the announcers, by the sports commentators, by the analysts. And as we discussed, what are the two things that Vipras represent, that they give to the warrior culture? The first thing is that tactical advantage through thinking out new innovations in weaponry and also in battle tactics. What was the second thing? The chronicling of the history of the kings for the sake of glory. And look at the infrastructure of football. In between the games, pre-game show, and all week, what do you have? A bunch of thinkers talking about the individual matchups, analyzing the different players, analyzing the coaching styles, drawing the X's and the O's. If you think about the video game, that's the most popular American football video game, it's named after a Vipra, named after a thinker, John Madden, who went from being one of the great coaches to one of the great commentators, one of the great analysts. And now you have a whole ecosystem of guys, some of whom never even played football, who are commentators, sports radio announcers, TV commentators. So many of the big commentators, former coaches or former quarterbacks. The thinker inside the Kshatriyan world, really taking it over, becoming almost more important. You know, during football season, there's more time spent by people watching and listening to the announcers and the analysts than people spend actually watching the games. ESPN, right? And all of the sports radio. It's all thinkers. It's all thinkers. So that's the view, and seeing it not in history, but seeing it in your world. Okay, so let's step back into history. And I think it's clear that what starts to happen is this Vipra class, just as with football, there's only ever 11 guys on the field. That's been since the beginning. That's with the Kshatriyas. You can only ever muster so many of your society to go off to war. And out of those people, the true warriors, the truly good warriors, there's only a certain percentage of those. But as the thinker becomes more valuable, their numbers start to grow. They start to develop their own hierarchy. Because the more complexity that you can add on, the better you can compete with the other thinkers. So that this guy on the defense builds a wall. So this guy builds siege weapons. So this guy builds defenses to the siege weapons. You see the arms race? But it's the same warriors, the same warrior group. And they become the advisors to the kings. They advise them on military matters, but they also keep a knowledge of the past And that starts to become valuable as we move forward because they're chronicling the battles and how the battles were won. So they can start to advise the kings who are warriors, who are the bravest of the group, not necessarily the smartest. They can advise the king on civic matters. They can advise the king on how to rule. And really, it's their brain that becomes the ruling brain. The king goes to his advisors. And it's really his advisors who say, here's how we're going to move forward. Here's how we can solve this problem. Now, the issue that arises as the Vipra mindset starts to take over is a new issue in society. In Shudra society, everyone is a producer. If you're old enough to walk, you're either hunting or gathering, you're producing something within the tribe. The Kshatriya come out of, they are Shudras, right? So they grow out of that. It's the spectrum again. They're just the bravest Shudras. They are used to being productive. And in the initial phases, they're hunters. Or if they're warriors, they're part-time warriors. When it becomes a full Shudra class, and they're no longer either hunting or farming, then they can still provide resources directly by going out and raiding other tribes. They can raid for resources, and the Vipras teach them they can raid for slaves. And the Vipras invent slavery. It's a great resource tactic. Right? You can force somebody to work harder and give them less resources. They take less resources than other members of the tribe. And even a great many even indigenous tribes have some concept of someone captured in battle who becomes a sort of servant to the tribe. So, as the Vipras grow, though, as they become, and remember, because they're the brain, if the king is asking, well, why do you need like 3 more guys? They can tell the king, well, this is why I need 3 more guys, because I need to do this, and they're smarter than the king. And the king is supposed to listen to them for advice. And as they start to grow, you have this whole new group of individuals who are not productive. And the first thing that they do is they have to create some, I don't know if you want to call it a smokescreen, but there needs to be some rationale for their existence. There needs to be some reason for them to exist. And the religion, if you will, of the Shudras, of Shudra societies, is something that you might call animism. It's basically a belief that there's kind of a spirit in everything. Everything's living. I'm a part of that. The modern version of that would be like Wiccan or Gaia worship. Kind of the way that environmentalists view things. Oh, it's Mother Nature. There's a spirit. We're part of everything. It's a very Shudra style of religion, if you will. The religion of the Kshatriyas is basically one of stories that are examples to live by. So whether this is the Greek mythology of the heroes and the gods, whether this is the Norse mythology, whether this is, to a certain degree, Native American mythology, this is warriors who have these sorts of stories as examples of how a warrior is supposed to behave. With bravery, chivalry. These stories are carried on by the thinkers, but they're fundamentally stories to benefit the warriors. Now, the religion of the thinkers, they are, again, remember, tasked with protecting their patron king. One of the most important things in protecting the patron king is we can't have people trying to kill the king. We have other warriors, but we need a way to put them in their place, not by the sword. Okay? Just really get that clear. All right? The warriors dominate the common masses with the sword, with fear. But remember, a warrior is not, his whole thing is to not be scared. So if you try to dominate him, he's going to fight back. So you need a way of setting up a hierarchy amongst these warriors that they aren't always, because a great warrior is not scared to attack. So what you need is a system of ethics. You need a system of ethics. You need a way to control the mind of these individuals. You need a power that they are powerless against. Get it? You need to create some mechanism that will serve justice upon a warrior who's gone off track. A warrior who's not behaving. You need a god. And then you need to attach the king to the god. In Europe, this expressed itself as the divine right of kings. In ancient Egypt, this expressed itself as the pharaoh actually being a god king. 2 in 1. They had a pantheon of gods, and the pharaoh became as one of the gods. When you have a very advanced thinker society, they eliminate the king altogether. And it's a thinker, because they've so effectively pushed the rules in. So when you get to Judea in the time of Christ, that's being ruled by Rome, but only tangentially. The Romans don't really have to do much. Because the Jewish people have been under the high priest since the time of Moses. Moses just eliminated a king. Right? So the highly advanced thinkers just eliminate the king. And you get the thinker Vipra society turnover. Boom. The founding fathers of the United States, what did they eliminate? There's no king. And while the first president was a warrior, you look at some of the other founding fathers, look at the guys on the money. Oh, they're thinkers. I mean, Jefferson, philosopher. Ben Franklin, inventor. Hamilton, well, okay, he fought in the military in the Revolutionary War, but what was he? He was an artillery captain. And what's crucial for artillery to work well? He was a great one, by the way. Mathematics, trigonometry, trajectory. A great artillery battalion commander is really dealing with math. Artillery's math. It's a standoff weapon. And then Hamilton went on to become the first Secretary of the Treasury. Math. Go figure. Thinker society. When you have a thinker society, though, what's the problem? In these early days, the church, the advisors to the king, the church starts building things up. They start building out the church. Now there's priests. Now there's nuns. They're not productive. To this day, Buddhist monks survive basically off begging. The church survives off donations. They don't make anything. And in a society where there is not a lot of excess, in a society that has been based upon every man creating maybe just a little bit more than he and his family needs, and every family, every man and woman, this creates an issue of resources. You can only conquer so much territory, and you can only enslave so many people. And yes, every once in a while, you'll get an advance that makes the average farmer more productive or the hunter more productive. But you can't rely on these things. You can't rely on them. So there becomes a need, or at least an opportunity. You've got a Vipra society, a thinker society. Every day, less people are producing, and more people are thinking, really. The warriors, it wasn't such a big deal because, the warriors have a natural population control aspect to them, right? They go off and fight. Some of them die. We no longer need to provide them resources. But the advisors stayed back here. Their group keeps growing. So somebody needs to figure out a way to take the society as it currently is and somehow to generate excess to meet the needs of the non-productive population. And this is where the merchant comes in. This is the niche that they fill. And this is their relationship to the thinkers. Without the merchant, the thinker, Vipra society, has no resources to survive. I'm going to go into that in the next video. This one was considerably shorter, and I think the next one should be relatively short as well, because I think as we move along, it should start to make sense. Right, so when we pick up the next video, we'll be talking about the Vaishya or Vaishya merchant Varna and how it plays in. And then the video after that, very interesting, because we're going to talk about the move from merchant, where the merchant mindset is in control of the society. I think you could probably guess which one of these Varnas we're in right now in a big way. And what the move back to Shudra, to commoner, to the masses looks like. If you'd like to discuss this further, or you have any questions, it's a conversation. Please contribute. It adds to it. This is a cycle that we're all inside of, and the way for us to truly explore it is to share. You can do that at facebook.com/vinarmani. I'm pretty sure that you're going to have to be logged in. There's been some people asking about that. You're going to have to be logged into your Facebook to see the page and comment. So just go ahead and do that. I'm really looking forward to your comments. And the next video is going to be the fascia Varna.